To summarize the content of the program we've been putting together for you for your conference this year, it really comes down to how do you generate more engaging conversations that open up your prospects in such a way where they're going to share, their situation, share their perspective, so that it opens up a selling opportunity. And that generally means they've got to drop their guard or drop their resistance and agree to kind of be honest and open up and give you information that you can react to and respond to so that some trust and the relationship can develop. So in the first two topics, we talked about storytelling as an effective way to do that. And that, the keys to a really good story is you have a problem that the prospect can relate to or can really understand. And that problem allows you to ask some questions that they're going to be more likely to respond to. So stories are a great way to open up the conversation, bring interesting information in there that kind of lowers that overall resistance level, and in general, just create a more engaging interaction. So in the Challenger sale, what the folks from CEB really introduced was that a lot of the most successful sellers use a more provocative style of selling, which is bringing in contradictory or contrarian thinking into the conversation in a way that causes the decision maker to react to it. And if it's done right, that contrarian information or data or insights will have the effect of kind of knocking them off of their current way of thinking, or at least getting them to suspend their current beliefs and look at a different perspective or paradigm. So the whole concept of challenger selling is based on the fact that the prospect or decision maker doesn't know what they don't know. And we make them aware of that by bringing information that we're aware of, proprietary insight, so to speak, that get them to react to that and open up their mind to new ideas and new solutions and just new ways of approaching the problem. So in this topic, we're going to be looking at that. How do you do that? What we hear from a lot of salespeople and sales managers, for that matter, is the challenger concept is really appealing, but how do you really plug it into a selling interaction? And what we're going to present to you is a way of doing that where you can plug this into almost any interaction. It doesn't need that much preparation. It's just a way of bringing an insight in that leads to questions, leads to some nice solution ideas, and leads to even more questions. So again, the goal is the same in terms of opening up the conversation, bringing in some good engaging questions, but it's done in a different way. So the entire process that we're going to be presenting to you starts with this data-driven insight. And that leads to a broad, open-ended question, some clarifying questions, and then a solution or a shift that other clients of One Digital are making that are helping them to address this problem and really solve that problem. So again, it starts with that data-driven insight, then it leads into some questions, clarifying questions, getting that prospect talking, and then solutions or shifts other clients are making, which leads to an open-ended question, which really brings that solution into the conversation. So what we're going to do is demonstrate to you two components to this. The first is introducing a data-driven insight. And the issue we're going to be looking at is, lowering employee engagement leads to lower profitability, and obviously what One Digital can do to change that situation. But clearly that's a huge problem. If employees are less engaged because of a wide variety of factors, and obviously including the COVID situation, work from home, and all the challenges that creates, that's going to lower profitability. So One Digital's ability to bring ideas and bring solutions that can increase profitability could be a real, game changer. And it also represents a new way of looking at a benefits provider. Most likely, a lot of prospects don't really see, a health insurance broker as a company that could really impact that. And so it's positioning One Digital in a way where you guys can really make something happen in that area. So it starts with that insight up front. We bring that insight in. And in this case, the insight is going to be based around engagement, or how lowering engagement is impacting overall profitability. So for the purpose of this exercise, we want to use data. We want to use statistics. We want to use some real hard evidence that brings this insight to life. So let's start by listening to a few examples of just that first component, using data to present that initial insight.
So it's great to connect again. I think we've spent a lot of time talking about insurance, but I actually wanted to see if we had a minute to talk about people and sort of the business and your teams that you have. I learned something the other day that was really shocking to me is that, and as a person that has hired people over the years, it really shocked me even more, that basically if you hire the wrong person, you might expend 4 to 27 times the cost of their annual salary in trying to fix that problem. I mean, that is crazy, and it depends certainly on the hierarchy or the level that you're hiring. But I mean, even in the middle of that, if it's 10 times their annual salary, that means that you're just tacking on a zero to whatever you were hoping to hire them for. So a $35,000 person, hired incorrectly could cost 350 grand to our bottom line at the end of the year. So that was pretty crazy. I'm curious if you've ever had, a sense that you might have hired the wrong person or that your team has hired the wrong person, and what kind of, impact that made on the organization.
So here's another example of, once again, just that first part using data to talk about lowering engagement and the impact on profitability.
So 2020 was obviously a very challenging year for everyone with COVID, the riots, protests, and the wildfires in California, and people losing their homes from the evacuation. And there's just this total chaos. And the impact that it had on employers was just devastating. And people they ended up having to work in a completely different type of situation. Even though they wanted to get back on their feet, they had to interview people virtually. It was all on Zoom. No one's shaking hands anymore, and it just became very difficult for HR managers as well as just managers in general to hire new people. And the problem is that a lot of times, there's actually a study out there that says that 50% of the time, uh, the person that you're hiring is going to be a mishire. And to top it off, the cost of a mishire turns out to be 4 to 27% of that person's salary. And so I'm curious. I mean, what have you guys seen throughout this crises in hiring new folks? How's that work for you?
So let's listen to a third example that's data driven, short and concise, that leads to a nice open ended question.
So, you know what? Our conversation's been excellent, but I really want to pivot to something that's really important to me. So, I like to read different stats. And one thing that I literally was blown away by, and I think that you will be too, is that for every 50 employees that an organization has, the loss of profitability has been $1 million this year because of COVID and people not being present at work. Hearing that, what's your reaction to that? And are you feeling the same impact?
All right, so a good insight has a startle or head snapping element to it. And in those examples, we notice that there's a statistic about, hiring the wrong person or lowering engagement, how that can lead to, an X factor of lost profitability and productivity. And in some cases, one bad hire could lead to hundreds of thousands of dollars of lost profitability. That can be a real head snapping insight. And that's something you really got to present. So we look for statistics that are startling, that really get their attention. So it makes it more likely that they're going to react to that when you ask them that question. The more startling the information is we share, the more likely we are to get kind of a strong reaction. And that's what challenger selling is all about. It's about engaging a conversation that is about kind of dramatic or paradigm shifting ideas. So that's really important. So to summarize, when you present a data-driven insight, you want to look for data that is startling, that is surprising, that is going to get their attention. And when you do that, you follow it with a nice broad question that leads into some clarifying questions. So you ask these clarifying questions, and ideally you get the prospect to tell you that, sure, engagement is an issue, and yes, it is impacting productivity, and it is impacting profitability, and it's something that we need to address. So once you've shared that insight, ask some clarifying questions, got them talking about the issue and the employees they have that have been left behind, now you're going to talk about that shift that other clients are making that is helping them to deal with this problem. So let's look at a few different examples of explaining that shift that will again lead to a good open-ended question that is really kind of presenting a solution and getting that prospect or decision maker to react to it.
What's really impressive to me is that we obviously have this problem too. I mean, our team at One Digital hires people every day, and I'm fortunate to be part of that team in many cases. And I was excited that we actually engaged our own human resource consulting team to help do a workshop for us to figure out how to hire more effectively. And everyone that was in this organizational conversation was a veteran of our industry, most of the time a veteran of our company. And every single one of us realized that we had been doing it wrong pretty much the whole time. So we were really excited to learn some of these tips and techniques in a 2-day workshop. We didn't feel stupid, but we learned a lot from it. So let me pause for a moment and ask you, can you envision, a population of folks and leaders at your organization, managers that could benefit from a workshop like this, and what might that, impact in future hires and their development as professionals within your organization as well?
Okay, here's another one. Again, that's coming after the clarifying questions where you're talking about the shift other clients are making. Let's listen to this one.
Wow, you know what? That absolutely doesn't surprise me. And the results that you've had and what you just shared with me makes absolute sense. And it's a struggle that we find most employers have some theme of. COVID has been such a dramatic impact for people. So we have found a number of different solutions that we've engaged for people. And in particular, similar industry to you, you're in the construction industry. We have a very large electrical contractor who realized that their engagement was being impacted due to some substance misuse issues among the workforce. And that was their direct hit for profitability. And through working with our HR team to identify the factors and identify managerially how could we take away stigma for these sorts of situations, they were able to have an incredibly impactful result for their employee base and for their bottom line. As we think about your organization and where you are right now and applying these principles that we've talked about, what sort of impact do you think we could have for you? And how would that impact your bottom line and your people?
All right, so what we noticed in that shift that clients are making is we talk about some changes or some ideas that we're helping, that One Digital is helping them with, and that leads to a question at the end, which we call kind of a forward thinking question, which is, how could a similar approach or similar process work for you, or what kind of results would you expect if you were to try something similar? At SalesGym, we really like these forward thinking questions where you get the prospect, instead of asking them, what do you think of the idea, or, how does that idea sound to you? Now, instead, ask them, how would this idea work in your organization? Or how could a similar approach be adapted to work with your team? Or tell me how you think your employees might react if we took a similar approach. Or, if we were to do something similar to this, how would this address the problems that you're currently having? When we ask questions this way, it gets the prospect of thinking about how this idea would work in their organization. Not whether or not it would work, but how it would work and how it could be executed and implemented in their organization. So these are those forward-thinking questions. So in just a moment, Emily is going to give you an example, start to finish, of how this all could work, where we start with that data-driven kind of head-snapping insight up front, a broad question followed by some clarifying questions, and then into that shift that other clients are making that ends with that nice forward-thinking question. So pay attention to how she does it, and we'll make a couple of quick comments at the end. So one of the things you really notice about what Emily did is there was a really good flow from the insight to that broad question, and that's important. The question should really connect to the data-driven insight that you're presenting. And then she showed you how those clarifying questions could connect to get them talking about employees that have been left behind. And then once she gets to the end of those clarifying questions, she talks about what other clients are doing, how One Digital is helping them to deal with that problem, help them solve that problem, address those challenges, and that leads to that open-ended, forward-thinking question. So that's what it's really all about, and that's what you're going to be practicing in the breakout workshop. So it's really going to be about that first part, the head-snapping insight, data-driven around lowering employee engagement. You want to focus on that with the first broad question. And then the second part will be the shift that clients are making that you're helping them with, that is connected to that forward thinking question. Don't worry so much about the clarifying questions in the middle. Let's just do that first insight with the broad question, and then the shift that other clients are making that leads to that forward thinking question, which is how could a similar idea be adapted to work in your organization? What results would you expect? So that's what we're going to be working on in the breakout workshop.